Welcome aboard. I'm Ted Everingham, and this is Great Lakes Log from WMTV at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. Gary Jobson is an Cup sailor. He was an All-American sailor, 3 times? Collegiate Sailor of the Year twice. Raced in the America's Cup with Ted Turner, Fastnet race, all the world's great races. Television commentator for the America's Cup, the Olympic Games, Volvo Ocean Race, taken us cruising in the Arctic and Antarctic and around Cape Horn. Television on ESPN, NBC, PBS, author of 18 books, lecturer for 35 years, and a good friend. If you are even remotely interested in the sport of sailing, you know the name Gary Jobson. Gary, welcome. Is this the 3rd or 4th time?
It's at least 3.
Okay.
Maybe even the 4th. And it's always a pleasure. You do such a nice job.
Well, I try and do on a local level what you've done for the rest of us around the world with this sport, which is so remarkable.
Thanks.
You're here because?
Well, I'm in Detroit because the weather is so nice. But more importantly, I've been long associated, over 20 years now, with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. We have several events here in the metro area and just up north to Port Huron. And I like to help kick things off. And I do this around the country, not just exclusively in Detroit, and get some enthusiasm going, because raising money for these blood cancers I find to be vitally important. And I'm happy to report, by the way, this is my 22nd year of doing this. We're now up to $48 million have been raised, and all that money goes into cancer research.
And it's very effectively spent. The statistics are amazing about the progress it's fighting the blood cancers.
So approximately 80% of the money we raise actually goes to the mission of cancer research and sometimes patient care too. And that's when you get $4 out of $5 actually goes to the mission, you've done very well in fundraising. When you have these events, you do have a tent and you do have some expenses, so we cover that. Well, you get a lot donated too, and it all adds up.
It sure does, and there are 4 of those in Michigan now, spread from May through August. You're here to kind of kick those off, get the season started.
Occasionally I get to come to events here. Michigan in the summertime is a pretty nice place to do some sailing.
And this is a guy from Annapolis, Maryland, folks. One of the sailing capitals of the world. So, for those who don't know, tell us what the Leukemia Cup is, what it does, how can people participate?
Well, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society was organized a little after World War II to raise money for cancer research, patient care, and information services about these blood cancers. And at the time, 95% of children died from leukemia, and the mission was to raise money to tackle this. So over the years, 60-some years now, the society's done very well, and now the survival rate is terrific. Still not 100%, that's why we keep working, but I think it's maybe 90% rate for children. And the ironic twist of life for me is 10 years after getting involved, I myself was diagnosed with lymphoma. And I can remember telling the people from the society at the time, well, at least next time I go to an event, you won't have to have a patient, I'll be able to describe it. Of course, Sevalier, and it got more serious because it did take me 2 years to recover from it all. But I do understand the disease, and as a direct result, I'm continue to be dedicated to the mission and helping out, and I try to get to 18 or 20 events a year.
Well, you're a huge help. I remember seeing you, we're talking about little personal stories. I remember seeing you when you were in the early stages of your recovery or treatment. In Annapolis, I was there for an event, a sailing event, and there was an opening ceremony down in the city center or whatever it's called, and you spoke. And I'd known you for some period of time and seen you on TV, and I didn't recognize you.
Yeah, well,
you were very thin, gray looking.
Well, blood cancers are very tough on you, and you lose tremendous amount of weight, you lose your hair. Of course, I did that anyway. At a certain age, maybe that happens a little bit. And they're devastating, and you're totally exhausted. I had red blotches, a horrible cough that went away, night sweats, and it actually took me about 4 months from the time I started not feeling well to actually had the courage to go find out why. And I laid doc, I said, if I hadn't come in here, how long more would I have lasted? He said, probably a month. So
Really?
that was very sobering. And I think when the lesson there is if people don't feel well, just go to the doc. They know this stuff, and you know most times people are fine, need a couple days rest. But if it's not fine, early treatment really helps. Don't let yourself get into extremis.
Well, you look great.
Thanks.
And I know you've got a lot of energy. You're all over the world.
Well, thanks. I don't know why I got so lucky, but I remember at the time I was not done, and I would continue on, and you know I'm knocking on wood here and getting teary-eyed, but I'm doing well.
The last book that I remember talking to you about was the one, a big book with a picture of you in yellow fall weather gear on the cover. And what was unique about Gary and not about an event? It was about Gary Jobson.
Well, it opened with getting cancer and recovering from it, and then that segued into my early life and racing with Ted Turner and America's Cup and ESPN life and everything since. And it was very therapeutic to do. The backstory is I actually wrote a lot of that when I was ill. Then I recovered and said, oh, I don't really need to do that. And then, you know, you turn 60, I thought, you know, maybe I better get this down on paper. And, you know, we have grandkids, and I wanted to preserve it. It's going on its third printing, by the way. It's actually done okay.
Well, you've done one since then on Nantucket.
Did sailing on Nantucket, and the migration from the whaling industry, which was huge at one point in the 1800s, to the sailing today. And then I have one on Barnegat Bay, New Jersey, which is a body of water, 18 miles by 2 miles wide on the Jersey Shore where I grew up. And there's 13 yacht clubs there. And I've got this book really rolling. And then Hurricane Sandy, a little over a year ago, struck. So the narrative of the book has changed a little bit of how these people have overcome adversity, and sailing continued on.
When's that book out?
That'll be out in May.
May.
I'm doing a documentary and a book, both. And it's got a unique name, Chasing Roosters. And 100 years ago, it's the 100th anniversary, the first race in Barnegat Bay got a flag with a rooster on it. And every Saturday, whoever wins, you get a flag with a rooster. So Chasing Roosters, everyone wants to get that rooster flag.
Got to have that book.
Thank you.
I need that book. Great. And I know you were at the America's Cup. I watched your America's Cup and watched you at the America's
Thank
Cup
you.
in San Francisco in the summer of 2013 or early fall. Very exciting, ironic end to the whole thing. What's your takeaway from that event?
I've been around the America's Cup a long time. I've been to every America's Cup since I was 12 years old in 1962. So this was the 51st year that I've been part in some way as a spectator, as a sailor, 5 campaigns, and this was my 9th as a commentator. So I look at the America's Cup with very wise, and I've learned not to get overwhelmed by it or too surprised. Now, having said that, the 34th defense of the America's Cup went far beyond anybody's beliefs. The boats, the emotions, and the storyline, amazing comeback of the American team being down at one point 8-1. You have to win 9 to win. They're down 8-1, and they found a way to come back. Even you, Ted, couldn't write that script.
No, I couldn't write. No, I wouldn't.
And it made a very compelling television, and it was fascinating to be with these sailors, both New Zealand and the U.S. squad. I'm interviewing them every day and getting to know them, and you know, you're having compassion. I kind of thought, why don't we just make this a tie? This is just too horrible that somebody's actually have to win this thing. But that's what the nature is. In the end, Team USA got the job done.
Well, it's really ironic because, as you say, the New Zealand team was ahead 8-1. They needed one victory.
One 10-mile race, one little wind shift, one 25, 30 minutes all over, and the cup is on its way to New Zealand, and they just couldn't get it done.
What's your read on how that all happened?
Well, 2 things happened. One, the Americans improved, and the American team had the attitude, we're not done yet. Nobody got down on each other, and within that camp was, how can I help? Everybody made a list. They weren't afraid to experiment, and they got better. And they made incremental improvements along the way with the shape of the sail, with the way they set things, where they put ballast, how they sailed the boat. They studied the other guys with film, maneuvered the boat. They got better. New Zealand had the attitude, very different. We're at a high peak. We're winning. We're not broken. Let's not change anything right now. And then as the U.S. boat got closer and closer, I think there was a mental shift in that New Zealand. They actually started getting nervous. And you know, you watch the Detroit Lions, and they're leading in the 4th quarter, and then they go into this horrible thing called prevent defense, which is a good way to prevent you from winning. They didn't stay aggressive. They didn't try, and they had such a big lead. One should experiment. So you lose a race or two because you tried something out. No big deal. But then when it got close, New Zealand didn't have anything more in the tank. But for those of us on TV, what a great story.
Oh, it'll be a wonderful story. Doing a little telecasting, and loving the sport. I could imagine. Of course, I'm insanely jealous of you anyway. You've taken something you love and learned to make a living with it. But it had to be really exciting to cover that event. Well, it'll never happen again. Never quite like that.
3 times in Cup history, it's come down to a final race. 1920 between Resolute and Shamrock, and then of course 1983 Australia 2 against Dennis Conner and Liberty. And here it happened again, and it was just very emotional. I mean, Larry Ellison is in his launch right next to our committee boat, and I talked to him before the races sometimes, and it meant a lot to him. I mean, he's this kind of aloof billionaire, but in fact, he was totally engaged into it. And those sailors, they really cared, and both of them trying very hard. And you can imagine New Zealand, this country of 4 people, smaller than where I come from, Maryland. And I think they had something like 84% of the televisions in New Zealand were tuned in live to the America's Cup races. That tells you what it meant to that sailing island nation.
I was in Toronto during the event, and when it got to be 8-1.
Were they cheering for the U.S. or for New Zealand?
Yes. Yes. But one of the fellows I was working with, it was Ralph Roberts, someone you and I both know from New Zealand, an international judge, but for many, many years.
Very well, highly respected guy.
Highly respected guy, and of course he was watching very politely, hoping the hometown guys would win. And he was sitting there texting with friends back in Auckland about the event as it was going on. It was really kind of fascinating to watch.
It was compelling television, and I think what separated this, I mean, on the one hand, you had these boats that went fast. So visually, it was kind of cool. But the human interest story went beyond that. You know, could this team, with all this determination, make a comeback? Could this team, representing such a tree, hold on to their lead? And think about it. We have 7 cameras aboard each boat. We have 5 sailors with sound on, 2 helicopters on the air, these very nifty graphics so you could see precisely what's going on. And I mean, during the Super Bowl, I would have loved to know what Peyton Manning was saying when that ball sailed over his head on the first play of the game, or what was going on the sideline when the coach started to realize this is slipping away from us. In the America's Cup, we could hear it.
Live, real time, pretty exciting. Let's fast forward to the next America's Cup, the 35th defense. Where do you think it's going to be? Big controversy now, whether it should go back to San Francisco, Diego, Hawaii.
The New York Yacht Club for years was very clever because before the end of the America's Cup, they would always put a statement, this goes back to the 1800s, if we successfully defend, the next event will be held in 3 years' time, it's going to be in yachts, and the venue will be Newport, Rhode Island. All set up, and then the winning boat, usually the American, would cross the line, and then they'd pull out some paper out of their pocket, and we've just received the challenge here from the Yacht Club de France, and have it in 3 years' time, in 12 meters, here in Newport.
Yep.
That didn't happen. They did pull out of a pocket and had the Hamilton Island Yacht Club from the north coast of Australia as a challenger record, but nothing was decided. And at the time they said, well, we're with the challengers. But who's the challengers? So you have different groups trying to challenge, but it's hard to put together a campaign. Well, when's it going to be? What kind of boats we're going to be in? Who's going to be racing in it? Where's it going to be? And in my view, I thought San Francisco did a great job. Good win. The community was into it. It was exciting, compelling television. My criticism is that they need to get the wind limit up. I would submit here on Lake St. Clair, if you had a day that's blew 23 knots, everybody'd be coming in feeling a pretty good day. In the America's Cup, these boats should be able to sail more than 23 knots. So that's a design issue that needs to be addressed. But it should go back to San Francisco. That would be where I think it should go. And I have a gut feeling that Larry Ellison wants his event in his hometown.
In his hometown. And
so I would say in the end we see it in San Francisco.
yeah, I think it was great television. I really do. And it's a wonderful venue and a great place to sail. Let's face it.
It is. I mean, that wind would come up every day. And I ended up being very lucky. At first I was kind of disappointed. Jobson, you're going to be the guy out on the water. Now, wait a minute, I'm getting younger. I deserve to be in the booth, and you get to talk a little more in the booth. But as it turned out, being on the water was really cool. I'm on the committee boat. I was the only journalist on the course. And when you're on the committee boat, I mean, I talk to the competitors every day. There they are, and you're at the center of it, and I'm watching live, you know, and everybody else is calling from monitors and computers, and I'm watching the race. So you see things on the water. I mean, I put my tactician's mind into gear. You see stuff that you can't see on a TV screen. So for me, it became great fun, and I thank you for watching and just giving these nuggets. Boom, here's what's next, boom, and then throwing a little history. Now, you can't fake that stuff. No, it's 50 years of being involved in it. That's all absorbed, and as I see these things, I just let it rip, and it was very great fun. And then as the story got better and better, I was enjoying it immensely.
I could tell, and I've come to know you over the, and those 50 years of experience, and you only have 42 seconds to do something, and you were doing it well. And I wasn't going to ask you.
Fire away.
I wasn't going to ask you how it felt being kind of the senior correspondent, the voice of sailing, the face of sailing in the United States, to be there on the committee boat instead of surrounded with producers and directors and scripts and teleprompters. I wasn't going to ask, but you've just answered that question.
Well, I mean, initially I'm going to have to do this with my hands tied by my back, and you don't have that intimacy. But as the race has gone, first of all, you didn't want to talk too much because you wanted to hear what was going on the boats. That was very compelling conversations. And two, what I learned is that you get to say really cool things that count. So in a lot of ways, that became a very compelling part of the thing, to say stuff that I'd seen as opposed to just talking about odds and ends or filler. There was no filler for me.
You had the wind on their face and the whole thing, right? Tell me about design changes you anticipate. I read a couple of articles about the design hasn't been announced, the rule for the design of the boat for the next Cup.
Well, first of all,
what do you think is going to happen there?
First of all, other than the Hamilton Club, nothing has been announced. Nothing's official. But having said that, I think you're going to see a catamaran in the 60-foot size. I hope there's some national crew component. At least half the crew has to come from the country they represent. I do think we're in San Francisco. I would predict in the month of August, because putting it in September up against the NFL and college football probably doesn't really work for television, where you can own the airwaves. So smaller multi-hulls in San Francisco with some kind of component of the national cruise event.
You're for a nationality rule?
I am. In fact, if it was up to me, I'd put 100% nationals on the crew. 100% Americans on the American boat, 100% French on the French boat, 100% New Zealand. Because if you do, it's a little bit like the Olympics, which we're watching at this time, or soccer. I don't know a lot about soccer, but how's the U.S. team doing? Or, the Canadian-U.S. hockey game, which is coming up here shortly. It's really compelling because it's national cruise, and that's what you want to see. And when you do national cruise, it forces your country to develop your people and to train your people. It's easy to go hire people from around the world, and here's my best team. But to build from within gives lasting benefit to the sport. And that's why I'm so bullish that nationality is crucial to the success of the Americans.
Mr. Jobson, you're preaching to the choir. I couldn't believe it more. So that brings me to the state of the sport. You've been out of office as president of the governing body, United States Sailing Association, for what, a year, 2 years?
A year and a half, yeah.
Yeah. What is the state of the sport in the United States? Strong? What's weak? Is team sailing growing? Match racing, it seems to me, is growing in the United States.
Well, sailing has pockets of vibrancy, and it's got pockets of disappointment. And I think on the positive thing, American sailors are doing great internationally. Melga's 24, Melga's 32, the Lightning Worlds, Snipe Worlds, the Star Worlds, the Etchells Worlds, team racing, Med Cup, TP 52s, the kiteboarding worlds, the Moth World Championship. These are all Americans winning at the international level in the year 2013. Very impressive stuff. Junior sailing is doing great.
You're a big believer.
Yeah, 550 high schools have varsity sailing teams now. I think there's something like 220 colleges have varsity sailing teams. Some people were doing well. And we have strong yacht clubs. There's probably 700 really good yacht clubs in America with good facilities and waterfront. On the negative side, for some reason, the post-college grad, 22, 23 years old, seems to disappear till they're 30, 40. The pressures of building career and families, it's just hard. So it's up to those of us that are slightly older to make it easy for younger people to get involved in the sport. Fleets of boats at yacht clubs, El Cheapo memberships, open doors to people that have never sailed before, sailing instruction, and selling the fun of it, the freedom to be on the water, the connection of the generations, the environmentally sound sport. I mean, I can get going on, rolling. But if you do those things, people go sailing and say, wow, I could do this. I played basketball in school, and I wrestled in school too. In high school I wrestled, in college, believe it or not, I played basketball. It's hard for me to wrestle now, and I don't get to play much basketball other than shooting hoops every now and then, but I'm still sailing and doing okay.
Still sailing your wrestles. And
absolutely.
Good.
So, and by the way, I did serve out my term at U.S. Sailing. It was a very busy time, but I didn't end there, so I'm still engaged on a management part of the sport. You actually have to do an election to become a vice of the International Sailing Federation. There's only 8 on the board worldwide. There's 130 countries that vote for this, and you have to campaign wildly. And I'm only the 6th American since 1907 to make the board of ISAF.
Congratulations.
So, but I'm finding it to be quite challenging dealing internationally, and the issues are big and they're important. We run the Olympic Games, and so that has been keeping me off the street, and I'm traveling a lot. But it's very cool to get people internationally. Think of this. Our board of 8 people. We come from Turkey, Greece, Italy, England, the United States, Uruguay, New Zealand, and China. Now, how cool is it to get around the table and talk about your sport from people from all over the world? And what I think is, to work together like this, there's no reason people from around the world can't sit down at a table and work out problems.
Boy, I agree. On a much lesser scale, I've had similar experiences working with people on our sport, in a small piece of our sport, judging.
Well, that's an important part of the sport.
But with people from other countries, and sharing those experiences and realizing the commonality of our outlook. I could sit and talk with people from each of those other countries, and they would tell me the same thing about the importance of teaching children, the importance of making the sport fun.
And good sportsmanship and behavior is a big part of it.
Oh, don't get me started there either.
Okay.
So how long does that term last, Gary?
So you're elected for 4 years. You can run a second time and do 2 terms. So I'll either do 4, or if I feel inspired, I'll decide that in a couple of years. Sounds like a politician, see how my health is and things, but you can do a maximum of 8.
You're having fun with that.
Yeah, that's very cool.
You must have, between television, U.S. sailing, writing books, doing 2,000 lectures over 35 years, you must have enough frequent flyer miles to buy
6 million.
To buy your own airline.
Yeah, I have 6 million air miles, so it's rare that I don't get bumped up to first class. I mean, but that's nothing to brag about, because you really have to earn hard to do. But I travel so much that does make a difference. I have a lot of air miles, and I keep adding to it as long as I can.
To take just a peek at your new book, how old were you when you started sailing in Barnegat Bay?
6 years old.
And was your family a sailing family?
Yeah, my father loved sailing, and I grew up in a very tiny yacht club on Barnegat Bay, New Jersey, and he's the one that got me into sailing. He's long deceased now, but I look back and say thank you for introducing that. Because I went on in sailing far, he sailed past Barnegat Bay too much, and here I went off and did the world, and he set that up.
Again, I'm insanely jealous because you found a way to make a living out of your sport. How did you get hooked up with Ted Turner? I know this story. I want to hear it again.
Well, first of all, I saw Ted 2 weeks ago in Atlanta. We had a nice lunch, and I did an interview. I'm doing a show, a 30-30 show on ESPN with Ted Turner.
Oh, good.
So it was very cool. I sailed in a regatta. I was 22 years old in Barrington, Rhode Island. I was at the top of the heap at the end of the regatta, and so was Robbie Doyle. We were first and second. In the regatta, Ted Turner, who at the time was in his early 30s, came up and said, you know, I don't know who you boys are, but we're going to get together and sail. And a couple of years later, I started sailing with Ted, and in many ways we went off and won the Congressional Cup and the SRC, and that evolved to his America effort. I'm glad I wasn't part of his America's Cup effort when he was on Mariner, when they lost. I got to get on Courageous, and he's been a good friend and mentor and helpful all these years. Although I'll say something I didn't realize years later, that you know, I always looked up to Ted, and he always was there to help me in my business career or negotiating TV deals. I mean, he knew this world. That was his world.
Sure.
But what I didn't realize is that I was actually helping him along the way, too. And I asked him recently, I said, well, do you think that your business career helped your sailing? And he said, actually, my sailing helped my business career. Pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's helped me in a lot of ways. Unlike you, I started sailing when I was 29 years old.
Really?
Yeah, and I've been trying hard to catch up ever since. I've never had the experiences you've had. I'm not as good a sailor as you are, but it has made...
But you can do it.
I can do it, and I can do it the rest of my life. My kids can do it, and it's something that has changed my life in many ways.
That's pretty impressive. I mean, 29, you know, you miss a lot when you're growing up sailing. But you can make it up pretty quickly, and you certainly have done that with your umpiring and judging.
Tried. I've tried. Gary, thanks a lot for being here.
Always a pleasure.
It's fun to talk about sailing with you, and I'm just so glad that the Lymphoma and Leukemia Society had the good sense to tap you as its national chairman for the Leukemia.
I told him I would give 3 years, and I'm in my 22nd year, so I'll just keep going for a while.
They keep sending you invitations. You just keep coming back.
Thanks.
Thanks. Good luck with the series this year. Good luck while you're here. Come see us anytime. There's a small club down the way that you're always welcome there. They talk about you a lot.
Great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Gary. Thank you all for being with us. Get to one of the Leukemia Cups. There are lots of ways to support. This money really does good, and you can be part of that. We'll see you next time right here on Great Lakes Log.